because I think we really need to democratize the academic scene and take the sort of like the control of the elite places across the world. So that is something that we try to do with our journals. So that's enough of promoting CESRAN, and please do have a look at this booklet, and it says everything about us. So, why the fourth International Conference on Eurasian Politics and Society? This is the second time we are in Istanbul. Previous year we were in Konya, and my dear professor, colleague, Professor Murat Cemrek'ten was hosting us in Konya. Well, if you think about Eurasia, and I'm a scholar of peace and conflict studies, so now I'm talking completely in sort of not a conflict zone for myself, but when you think about Eurasia, encapsulated in a very large geography, Europe, Asia, and large parts of Africa, I would say that it's a hugely important place in global politics and international relations. It's not only perhaps the largest continent in the world, but about 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia. Most of the world's physical wealth is in Eurasia, and it is a hugely enterprising part of the world. I just come back from China, and I was really struck in terms of what's happening in China. Living in the UK, I realized that I live in a sleeping corner of the world. I mean, really, not much happens, and the only excitement we have is Theresa May and her gusts. But when you think about China, it's a real kind of potential and change, and it's quite amazing. Eurasia accounts for about 60% of the world's GNP, about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources, so on and so forth. So when you put all this together, Eurasia kind of comes to the picture as a very interesting, strong geographical place. But at the same time, Eurasia is also the epicenter of many armed conflicts, forced migration, humanitarian crisis, fragile states, ethno-religious dissent, rebellions, so on and so forth. So it's a very problematic area too. So it's not that wonderful kind of rosy story, but there are so many challenges and issues. And on top of that, the Western global powers like to dominate the politics in this part of the world. So you have these different agendas kind of clashing and creating a very interesting picture. So I think it's really important for us then, as CESRAN International, to provide a platform where we can talk about a wide range of issues within Eurasia that really matters. And I cannot think of any better place to do this than Istanbul, a place where has been home home for many different civilizations. I say it's a place, it's almost like a microcosm of Eurasia with its wealth of diversity, challenges, and resilience. So what I'm going to do in this conference over the next 2 days, you have the program, and I don't know you, but I was really impressed to see the program and the wealth and diversity of papers to be presented over the next 2 days. And we'll be covering a wide range of issues within the Eurasian context, certain countries like Turkey or Turkic countries in Eurasia, energy security or modernization, migration, terrorism, cultural diplomacy, conflict resolution, so on and so forth. So I think each panel will be rich with its content, and that's going to be quite a fruitful experience for all of us. But before all that, this morning we prepared an intellectual feast for you. We have 2 leading scholars to kick off the discussions in this conference. Our first keynote speaker is Professor Neil McFarlane from the University of Oxford, and then we will have Professor Tim Jacobi from the University of Manchester. These are the keynote speakers for this morning, and then we will have Professor Mehmet Asutay from Durham University, and also Matthew Rizai, former US Ambassador to Azerbaijan, tomorrow morning. So 2 really interesting starting points for the conference. So without any further ado, I would now welcome you once again to the conference, and I wish you all a fruitful and productive conference. This is the fourth one, and we'd like to see you at the fifth, sixth, etc., the future conferences. And with that note, thank you very much, and I'd like to hand over now to our first keynote speaker, Professor Neil McFarlane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm grateful to be invited and honored to be here, not just on the panel, but with the association and in Istanbul. Keynote speeches are often a difficult challenge. You obviously cannot sum up a conference because it has not occurred yet. And the organizers wanted to say something reasonably related to one or more of the themes that were intended, and to say it in a more or less coherent way. I would like to talk about civilization, one of the themes of this conference, and its relationship to the international relations of the Caucasus. I have some general remarks about the category of civilization in international relations theory, and then I will look at the empirics to assess what, if you will, analytical and intellectual added value is produced by considering the international relations of the Caucasus in civilizational terms. I've had a long time working around this topic. I think the first presentation I gave on this was when Sam Huntington's Clash of Civilizations article and book just came out, and I was asked by the Georgian Foreign Ministry if I would comment on the Clash of Civilizations. And I warned them that I was always happy to go to Georgia, but I would be critical of this hypothesis. And they said, that's good. That's what we figured. That's what we want. And I can understand why. If you're a Georgian, you are living on what is proposed to be a fault line between civilizations. And I don't think anybody wants to live on the fault line of conflict. So criticism is welcome. I come at this, as I said, from the perspective of international relations. Does the concept of civilization help us to understand or explain outcomes, significant outcomes in relations between states, regions, or involving transnational groups? That was Professor Huntington's proposition. You could cut it short and simply say, well, what difference does civilization make to international relations? To answer this question, I guess the first stopping point, I hasten to add, I'm not going to stop there, but there's a panel on it later in the program. What are civilizations? What are we talking about? People are often a bit, I have to say, academically lazy on this point. One sees a lot of commentary about what difference civilization makes in international relations, but very little critical analysis of what civilization is. For example, in Huntington's book, he seems to take the meaning of civilization for granted. He never actually defines it, although he's talking about a clash of civilization. It appears that at some points he equates civilization with religion. Sometimes he conflates it with culture, and sometimes with national identity. It seems to me that if we're not clear on what we think it is, then it's difficult to draw conclusions about its impact. As I said, I don't intend to go into that in detail. We would still be here at dinner time if I did, so I'll leave that there. This is related to a larger, if you will, epistemological question in international relations. It's the vexed question of how you explain phenomena in international relations. It is claimed that civilization is a relevant structure, so I would situate it in structural theory. It is one of several structural theories attempting to depict, to explain international relations and ideally present reliable predictions, if you will. So if we think about other structures, we've got modern realism. The focus is on the distribution of power in conditions of anarchy. Or we have liberal theory, where the focus tends to be on the nature of the units that make up the system. So it's the nature of states that determine relations among them. Classic example here is democratic peace theory. A third variant, common, most of you aren't old enough to remember this, but I am old enough to remember it. Hans Morgenthau, in The Pursuit of Power, he talked about human nature as a way of looking at international relations. Somehow, international relations, like domestic structures, grew out of how human beings were by nature. This was deemed highly unscientific at the time and non-researchable as well, a set of non-defensible hypotheses. But it's now back, oddly. It's now back at the front end of the development of international relations theory in political psychology, experimental psychology, and neurosciences. So hold that space, but it's not my topic. On the identity side of the roster of possible paradigms, many believe that outcomes in international politics can be usefully explained, for example, by relation to nations or nationalism, national ideology, if you will. More recently, there's been a growing interest in religion as a driving force in world politics. And as I suggested, there appears to be some connection between religion and how people define civilization. Huntington suggested that, in his book, that the dominant paradigm of international relations in post-World War II era, that international relations was about the competition for power, and it was structurally bipolar because of the distribution of power, USSR, USA, all of us little guys in between. He suggested that that paradigm was being replaced by a cultural map involving struggle between civilizations, largely and interestingly, along the cartographic fault lines between them. Every time I go through Istanbul Airport, I wonder about that because there are people from everywhere there, all basically going by each other, not causing problems, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure if that makes it a fault line or a joining point. This leads me to the caucuses. I have two introductory comments. One, and I apologize for excessive preoccupation with modern positivism. It's a methodological point. If in qualitative political science and case study theory, we think about how you apply cases to theory, then the caucuses, to my mind, is what they would call a most likely case where civilizational theory would apply, where civilizational difference did drive international relations. The general argument here is that if a theory cannot explain the most likely cases, then it is unlikely to be useful across the broad frame of international politics as a whole. My second point, leaving aside theory, is simple proposition, and I expect I don't have to defend this in Istanbul. The Caucasus is worth studying on its own, just to understand it, independently of any theoretical point. It's an interesting and important place in itself, not least for Turkey, given Turkey's identity connection to the region, the strategic cooperation between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, the importance of energy and other economic flows from Turkey, to and from Turkey across the Caucasus and towards the Caspian Sea, and perhaps, controversially, the traditional role that the Caucasus played as a geopolitical buffer between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. So, what can we say about the utility of civilization as an approach to the region's international relations? One problem that arises immediately is what civilizations are we talking about. If we take a religious view of civilizational identity, we might look at the region as the fault line between Islam and Orthodox Christianity. Of course, the Russians and the Armenians come from two different strands of orthodoxy, if you will, Eastern and non. Not the place to debate the issue of the distinction between monophysitism, diophysitism, and monophysitism. I guess that would be for religion class. And the Georgians, of course, share the conventional Orthodox position with the Russians. But, so we got a clear civilizational link into the region, arguably, and there is literally not a scrap of empirical evidence that that civilizational affinity has had any significant influence on either state in their bilateral relationship. On the Muslim side, one could argue that the conflict in Chechnya is a classic civilizational conflict. However, that conflict predated the arrival of Islam in the Northern Caucasus. It goes back to the 17th century. The post-Soviet phase of this conflict, dating from 1991, was the resumption of Chechnya's long struggle for national liberation. I chose my words carefully. National liberation. The Chechens wanted national self-determination. They were not at the time engaged in a transnational conflict between Islam and Orthodoxy in a civilizational world. And I think more broadly, you all know this better than I do, the rather homogeneous view of Islam often presented in civilizational hypotheses ignores an extraordinary amount of diversity within the Islamic tradition. Islam is a complex community or set of communities, and it does not invite, to my mind anyway, broad cultural generalization. So what about other elements of the international relations of the Caucasus? Now I'm coming to the end here, you'll be pleased to know. There is no empirical evidence that transnational trade and investment activities are driven to any significant degree by transnational cultural identity. Take, for example, the largest intra-regional relationship economically, that is the relationship between Azerbaijan and Georgia. The same, leaving economics aside, the same is true of alignment decisions, soft alliances in foreign and security policy. A civilizational alignment would suggest that Georgia and Russia should have close and amicable relations, and that they would balance against Azerbaijan and Turkey. However, in reality, Georgia's strongest perceived challenge or threat is Russia. And Georgia is in a soft alignment with Azerbaijan and Turkey, excluding Russia and Armenia. What Georgia is doing, thinking about other possible structural theories of international relations, what Georgia is doing is balancing against its most significant perceived threat in the context of an asymmetrical distribution of power between them. One could, I think, make a similar point about Armenia without getting into the history too far. To my mind, and we, I guess, probably have people here who can and possibly will contest it, there is no large civilizational connection between Armenian and Russian culture, and so far as I can tell, no great love between Armenians and Russians as people. Their alignment can also be explained by geopolitics, and in particular, the geographical positioning of Armenia between Turkey and Azerbaijan. In this case, the Armenians are balancing against their perceived threat. So, in general, the alignment decisions in the region seem to have very little to do with civilization and a lot to do with balance of power logics. We seem to be drifting into a brief discussion of conflicts. I'll leave it with one example and one sentence. The example is Nagorno-Karabakh, and all I would say here is that this conflict has been around for at least 100 years, and it's fundamentally about land ownership, not civilization. Where does this leave us in our consideration of the paradigm of clash of civilizations? Thomas Kuhn argued in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions that scientific advance involves the replacement of one paradigm, which has become increasingly obsolete, incapable of explaining what's going on, by another paradigm, which accounts for what's going on more effectively. Huntington suggested that civilizational approaches to IR was a new paradigm in the discipline, because it explained better than other ones the major phenomena of interest in the field. Well, and I argued on case study theory that if the civilizational interpretation of international relations works anywhere, it's most likely to work in the Caucasus. It's a most likely case. Leaving aside theory testing and thinking instead about understanding particular problems, this approach doesn't appear to help much either. It does not explain economic flows, it does not explain alignment decisions, and it does not explain conflict. Apart from that, it's a great theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. Now I will kindly invite your Professor Jim Jacob to give his speech as well.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I've got a PowerPoint coming up in front of you. And I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Bill mentioned, particularly around the role of religion in world politics. I'm a political scientist. I did my PhD in the politics department, where I was actually a lecturer many years ago. And I'm going to look at particularly the role of Islam within one of the most interesting, to my mind, political developments in the last few years, and that's the emergence and attempt at state building across the Syrian and Iraqi border, the like of the Islamic State, which by any measure, particularly by the Montevideo Convention of 1930, constituted a state between 2014 and 2016. And clearly it's a key issue in Eurasia today. Sorry, I'm really clearly it's a major issue in Eurasia today to have the creation of this kind of fugitive state right in the civilizational heartland, if you like, of the region. And despite being attacked by the combined military forces of 39 countries, it still controlled an area larger than Jordan for most of 2014 to 2016. Even at the end of last year, it was controlling an area larger than Belgium. It's controlling, at that time, revenues estimated to be larger than the GDP of Belize or Central African Republic. And it's formed key kind of links with other organizations around the world, in the Caucasus and in Northwest Frontier Province, particularly in the Afghani province of Nangarhar. And there's a been a lot of discussion about the role of religion within Islamic State discourse. And this is kind of touched a lot on, connected to a lot of what Neil was talking about in terms of the role of Islam as a kind of inherently bellicose, belligerent force in world politics, an anti-Western idea. And there's a lot of sensitivity amongst Muslims about that. You only have to listen to the BBC refer to Islamic State as so-called Islamic State. And even, I was watching the BBC News yesterday, and they now refer to it as the extremist organisation that refers to itself as Islamic State. So there's very kind of sensitivity about the role of Islam in the narrative. On the one hand, you have the BBC kind of hand-wringing liberalism and concerns about offending Muslims. On the other hand, you have a kind of Huntington-esque argument that, well, as well, it's just kind of, well, no more than you'd expect in an Islamic world to produce. And Glenn Beck, rather articulately summarised that as it is all about Islam in his recent book. However, in both these kind of cases, both the kind of BBC and the Obama-type perspective, Obama banned any mention of Islam in connection to radical, militant political violence on the one hand, and Glenn Beck and others on the other hand. Neither position have actually really analysed the content of Islam in the Islamic State discourse. And that's what I'm trying to do here. And to do that, I've looked at their flagship publication, a magazine called Darboq. Now, it was replaced at the end of last year by a retitled Rumiyah as Darboq. The town of Darboq fell to Turkish forces, Turkmen forces, at the end of last year. A couple of basic things about Darboq. Downloading Darboq in Urumiyah in most countries around the world is a criminal offence. In the UK, it's covered by the Glorification of Terrorism Act, and for me to download it, I had to get a public defence lawyer from the university to write me an alibi. So please don't go home and download this unless you want to get locked up. And people have been locked up for this, particularly downloading magazines like Inspire. A British Bangladeshi woman got a year in prison just for possessing the magazine Inspire, even though there was no prosecution case that she was found to harm anyone. So you could argue that, well, looking at a broader range of publications from Islamic State would give a better picture of what they think. But there's a big problem there, and I'll come on to that in a second. There's 5 basic reasons why looking at Darboq in itself, to my mind, tells us a lot more than looking more broadly. First is that it's official. There's no doubt that Darboq is published by Islamic State. It comes specifically from its Al-Hayat Media Council, and that's not necessarily true of a lot of what's uploaded onto the internet. May or may not be from Islamic State, we don't know. Secondly, its content is self-selective. It avoids the problem of methodological circularity, and this is a big problem in a lot of analyses out there. Essentially, what Mahmoud Mamdani like with Muslims, like the William Foundation and others, go out and they look for evidence that supports their particular point of view. So they already know that Islamic State has this aspect, that aspect to it, so they then go out into the chatter of the internet and find evidence that supports that perspective. Well, if you have a self-selecting content analysis like this, then that's not available to me. I have to go with what's there. Thirdly, it's well-resourced and highly influential. Islamic State have invested a lot of money and time in this magazine. It's written in immaculate English. It's also published sister publications in Russian, Spanish and German and other languages. It's all in high-definition imagery, extremely competent. And therefore, it seems likely that they'll take a lot of interest in its informational content. In other words, it's very likely to be an accurate representation of what they think. Fourthly, it presents a developing narrative. There were 15 editions over a 2-year period. And this allows us to kind of develop a thematic approach. So one topic might be mentioned in issue 1, another issue in another. Same topic might be revisited in issue 6, and 10, 15, etc. And by looking at all 15, we can trace out what Islamic State really thinks about any particular topic. And then finally, Darboq is highly influential. Every time a magazine was released, internet searches for Islamic State went up on Google by a factor of 160. And much of the high-resolution imagery it takes, filmed in 4K ultra-high def, is sold to the Associated Press. A lot of the images that you see on Islamic State have actually been sold via Al Hayat to CNN, to Al Jazeera, all the main, BBC, all the main, because they don't have any other source of information. There's no journalists walking around in Raqqa taking high definition video. So it's highly influential. So let's have a look at the corpus of literature that I looked at, 15 editions. First one appeared in July 2014, just at the moment of the announcement of that debate in Mosul. 14 more editions followed, and that constitutes a corpus of around 942 pages, just around 400,000 words that I've looked at. And I've broken it down into three basic sections. What is Islam, anyway? Well, you'll notice here missing is the hadith, of course. But I didn't look at the hadith in Darwin because the hadith in Darwin is very standard, actually. It just looks at Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, all the classic collections. I don't think you can learn very much by looking at its use of hadith. Totally standard, general usage. However, their use of the Quran is much more interesting. And their use of classical scholarship is also very particular, in my opinion. And there's use of contemporary scholarship, very important. So, those are three areas that I'm going to present now to you. The first one, the use of the Quran. In 15 editions, there are more than 2,000 references to the Quran. 75 of the Quran's 114 chapters are mentioned. Three key observations can be made about the use of the Quran. The first is that if you put the Quran in chronological order, and you will know that the Quran is not presented in chronological order, right? It's not in the order of revelation, as set out chapter by chapter. However, you put it in chronological order, and many of you will be aware it's a highly contentious thing to do. We debated exactly what was the order of revelation. Here I use the classic Orientalist position set out by the German scholar Mildecker 100 years ago. It doesn't matter which method you use, the point that I'm making remains the same. And that is that IS are particularly interested in one area of the revelation. They're not interested, as this graphic, I hope you can see it, shows, they're not interested in the early period. They're not interested in the first Meccan period, or the second Meccan period, or even really the third Meccan period. They're interested in the Quran that was revealed after the Hijrah, the Yathrib, in 622. In fact, out of the 48 chapters that were revealed in the first Meccan period, only 39 verses appear from there in all of 15 editions of Darwin. So why would IS ignore such a large section of revealed scripture? Well, one reason is that between 619 and 620, the Prophet lost two key sponsors, his wife Khadija and his uncle Abu Talib. Abu Talib first and his wife Khadija. They both died. And this threw his embryonic Muslim community into turmoil, made him very, very vulnerable. And this very difficult period in the Prophet's life leading up to the emigration, the departure to Medina, Yathrib, and later called Medina, a couple of years later, is reflected in the way that God reveals Scripture to Muhammad. It moves, in other words, the tenor of the Scripture moves from being focused on eschatological and ethical and theological perspectives, much more into the prosaic and the political, where the embryonic Muslim community is moving from a kind of mythical, mystical, spiritual group into administrators and involved in conflict, initially with the pagan Arabs in Mecca, and then, of course, when they arrive in Medina, they're dealing predominantly with Jews and Christians, some Christian communities outside the city, and that too is reflected in the Revelation. And it is that which is useful to Islamic State. They're picking up the Revelation as a prophet, as a statesman, as a negotiator and a leader of a minority group, a small group within a city made up of Jews and Christians and other potentially hostile groups. And in other words, they're looking at the Quran in search for their key objectives are seeking political legitimacy, imposing order, and claiming leadership of Muslims. The second key observation that you can make about its use of the Quran is that the most commonly cited verses are presented in isolation from what are generally regarded as key associated verses. So the tafsir of the Quran, study of the Quran, relies on putting verses together. Topics are not revealed in one, you don't deal with inheritance just in this chapter, this ayah. No. It's revealed throughout the Quran. And it's the job of tafsiri scholars to put that together. And there's a science to that, there's a method. And there are generally accepted verses that are put together. Here I'm using again an Orientalist position, and you can use any methodology here. I'm using Ruben Firestone's rather hostile reading of the Quran, I might say, certainly a very unsympathetic. And what he says is verses should go together in order to be understood. So if you take the three most common verses there, I've set them out on there. So the most common verse in all 15 editions is from Al-Ma'idah, which is the very last chapter to be revealed in the Revelation. And Al-Ma'idah 51, verse 51, according to Firestone, must be read alongside Al-Mumtahana, verse 8, and Fusilet, verse 34. They must be read together in order to understand God's instructions to Muslims on how to relate to non-Muslims. This is what the topic is about. But of course, you won't be surprised to hear that Islamic State does not follow that tafsiri orthodoxy. It puts Al-Ma'idah 51 in isolation in all cases. Al-Mumtahana 8 and Fusilet 34 do not appear in any of the 15 editions. And therefore, I would argue that their interpretation of how Muslims deal with non-Muslims, Al-Wala wal-Bara, those kind of old Islamic notions, it departs radically from Islamic orthodoxy. It also obscures the fact that this verse that deals with Muslims and non-Muslims came at a particular time in the Revelation, around the battles of Badr and Uhud, 624, 625 AD. And of course, there, God is saying to the Muslims, talking in the context of battle actually, and the word awliya in that verse is translated, should really be translated as military guardian. It really means guardian. Any of you ladies getting married, you will have a wali, right, at your wedding. Maybe some of you had a wali at your wedding. Same word, awliya, wali, guardian. That's what it means. And here's a particular military context. The second most common verse here is from Tawbah 5, very famous verse of the Quran, one of the war verses, or verses of the sword. Again, it's impossible to understand without the other 15 verses at the beginning of Al-Tawbah, the chapter Al-Tawbah. But only half of these are mentioned at all in that one. In other words, Islamic State ignores key associated verses all the way through the beginning of Al-Tawbah. The third verse there, Ali Imran 103, this only appeared from issue 10 onwards, when it seems that al-Baghdadi's leadership came under great strain. And the verse begins, and hold firmly onto the rope of Allah, all together, and do not become divided. Well, the rest of the verse is not presented. So, Islamic State is only presenting the beginning of each of that key verse, while citing it as the full verse. Even Tawbah 5, the second most common one there, is referred to as limited, abbreviated, to kill polyatheists wherever you find them. Issue 7, this is in issue 7, issue 13, and issue 15. In other words, the second part of the ayah, telling Muslims to act conciliatory, and various kind of conditions placed on that, are not presented in any of the 15 chapters. Okay, so that's the Quran. Moving on now, I'd like to look at the classical scholarship. Okay, so in our book as a whole, there are 65 different classical scholars referred to across So, contrary to some analyses that have pointed to Islamic State's attempts to recreate Abbasid greatness and that kind of atavistic reinvention of the Abbasi period, actually, none of the great Abbasi scholars appear in that book. Al-Farabi is absent, Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Tufayl, Ibn Rushd, and the only great Arab scholar of the Abbasi period, Al-Kindi, is also missing, all missing. Instead, nearly a third of all classical references to classical scholars in Darwin refer to one man and his two students. Who would that be? Who would IS refer to working in Damascus? Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, of course. Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah and his two students, Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Rajab. Sorry, Ibn Kathir, who also, Ibn Qayyim also Ibn Rajab. So why focus on this tiny Damascene school, working just in this small period of time? Well, one reason is that during this period, the Damascus was being multiply invaded. Ibn Taymiyyah himself was forced to flee from his home. He's from Turkey, actually, from Harran, in the very south of Turkey. He was forced to flee from his home as Halul Khan swept in, sacking Baghdad in 1258, displacing, bringing chaos as the Ilkhanate forces came from the east, came from the Mongol Tatar forces came in, bringing chaos throughout the land. He had to run away from his home to Damascus. There he became a professor, superior at a university, but even Damascus was being threatened. By 1299, Ghazan Khan was in Damascus, destroying so much of it. And during that invasion, of course, local forces from a place called Kisfawan, Lebanon, also attacked Baghdad. Now, these Kisfawan forces were Shia, actually. And Ibn Taymiyyah and his students were personally involved in these battles. They personally, not like professors today, hiding in our offices. These men took up swords against and fought in the streets against the Mongols. And they also were very important in condemning the Kisfawan rebellion and issuing fatwas, condemning the Shia who were working increasingly with the Ilkhanate forces coming in. And indeed, the Mongols converted to Shiaism later on. And Ibn Taymiyyah issued Shia Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah issued a famous fatwa not accepting that conversion. So, this is very useful for Islamic State. Islamic State does not in any place, in any 15th edition, focus on Ibn Taymiyyah and his scholarly work. No, they're not interested in Athari, which is the small school that Ibn Taymiyyah founded. They're not interested in Athari legitimacy or Athari theology. What they're interested in is social and political context. So Ibn Taymiyyah is presented as this warrior scholar focused on condemning Shia rebellion within the Abbasid period, focusing on condemning the Mamluk administrators in Cairo. They'd run away from Baghdad and reformed the Abbasi Empire in Cairo. And this is really useful for Islamic State. For example, a 6-page article entitled Lessons from the Fitna of the Mongols in 14th edition. This sets out and compares Baghdadi's own struggle, Islamic State's own struggle, with that of Ibn Taymiyyah, drawing comparisons between the invaders from the east in Islamic State's mind. These are what they call Safawi, the Iranian forces coming from the east, Qasim Soleimani, all that stuff. And of course, also facing crusaders. Ibn Taymiyyah also faced crusader invasions from Frankish armies who, from 1275 onwards, had signed an agreement with the Mongols and were crushing Syria from both sides. Perfect for Islamic State. They too are facing crusaders and Mongols. And that's exactly what they draw. They're not interested in Ibn Taymiyyah as a scholar. Ibn Taymiyyah was actually a Sufi, a Qadiri Sufi, working in that tradition, that doesn't interest them. They're interested just in his role as a political, social commentator. In other words, this whole kind of idea of Ibn Taymiyyah as a proto-Salafi connected to jihadism is really, in my opinion, completely spurious. And that's what I'll pick up here in the next slide. Contemporary scholarship. Now this is very interesting. What contemporary scholars are cited? Well, where are Islamic states in the political spectrum of Muslim thought of the day? Well, 57 contemporary scholars are cited. And here I define scholars as having training. So I've not included Bin Laden as a scholar, or Zahiri as a scholar, who's a doctor anyway, or Azakawi as a doctor, he's a petty thief from Jordan. No, these are scholars, these are people with legitimacy and training. So 57 of these, only 11 of these 57 are referenced positively. And here they are. Out of these 11, only 4 of these appear in the West Point's Atlas of Militant Islam, published before Islamic State emerged. So if you take the idea of Salafi jihadism, which is apparently the rubric we should see Islamic State through, actually only 4 Salafi jihadi scholars are cited positively. And one key thing links all of them together, and that is that they're dead. All 11 here, bar 2, Mohseni may be dead, he's been repeatedly reported to be dead, and he's certainly likely to be dead soon. He's being bombed continually. He's the only person at liberty. The only other one who's alive is Al-Humayni, who is mad, locked up in a Saudi jail, condemns people who wear shoes and uses electricity. He's an ascetic, a mystic, really. And he can't issue a kind of rebuttal of Islamic State. So that's why they cite people who are dead. Those people can't distance themselves from Islamic State, which is what every other single scholar worldwide has done. So, and it's significant. 46 of the 57 scholars cited are cited negatively, referred to negatively. Those close to the Saudi establishment are particularly targeted. So in issue 13, there's a long article in that book called Kill the Imams of Kufr, Disbelief. And it singles out many of the leading voices in Saudi, conservative Saudi Ashir tradition, the Najdi Ashir tradition there, commonly called Wahhabi, or the Orientalist popular press. So vociferous is its condemnation that, in fact, one such leading figure in Saudi, Aid al-Hani, was subsequently shot and wounded by an Islamic State operative in the Philippines. "34 of the 46 have been unequivocally categorized as Salafi in the terrorology literature. And in this slide, I've just put 15 of the biggest villains in the terrorology world. So if you're working in counter-terrorism, these are names that you know. And these have all been classified as Salafi jihadi writers, scholars, intellectuals, going back many years. There's all the big names here. BC, Said Imam, Abu Qatada, they're all there. And they're all unequivocally condemned by the Islamic State. Some are even takfired. Some are condemned as non-Muslims. So in other words, what I would argue is that Islamic State does not follow Salafi jihadi orthodoxy at all. It's far from it. It condemns, it goes out of its way to condemn what it calls fake Salafi jihadi scholars. It relies almost entirely on in-house fatwas. Zarqawi, Baghdadi, Adnani, the 2 Baghdadis. These are the people who are cited, even though they have little or no Islamic study training. And they make extraordinary assertions. Baghdadi, it says in Darbuk that Islam is the religion of war, quote unquote. Your prophet